I'm with James Walsh, who's the Senior Policy Adviser at the NAPF on workplace pensions. James, thanks very much for coming.
My pleasure.
One of the things about European pension provision that strikes you is that the majority of it is DC. And we seem to be inexorably moving to a world of DC over here. Now, your traditional member base, frankly, is the larger DB schemes, and you did say earlier, I think some of them are introducing DC as well, but the amount of time given to that tends to be very much less than the defined benefit original segment of the scheme. Now, if the world is moving to DC, the tail will eventually end up wagging the dog, because the end consumer, the member of the scheme, has an awful lot more choice in a DC environment, an awful lot more say in where the money goes and what happens to their benefits. So how does the NAPF feel about this? What are you doing to prevent yourself becoming distant from the real power in this changing world?
I don't think we see this as such a problem as you paint it, if you don't mind me saying so, Brian. Actually, we've got a lot of members who are providing DC schemes. Of course, the pensions landscape is changing, and the NAPF needs to change with it, but we are changing. One of the things we want to see in DC, for example, is to drive up standards. And that's why we've set up our pension quality mark, which provides a now well-respected and well-established benchmark for good quality DC provision in terms of good contributions, good communications with members, sound governance of the scheme. And we've now got over 100 schemes that have been awarded the pension quality mark, and I think that's really becoming widely respected as a good benchmark. So that's an example of where we're really trying to encourage high standards of DC provision.
The fact is that there aren't any other standards around. Until you invented the PQM, there was no national standard for DC scheme adequacy. But it's rather more complex than just saying there must be at least X percent of contributions, and there must be a communication strategy, and there must be a governance committee or board of trustees commensurate with DC. Aren't we still rather at a box ticking sort of level as far as that goes?
I think there's certainly a lot of room for development in DC. I mean, for example, we talk a lot about our idea of super trusts. We'd like to see much more scale in DC pensions, because, as you'll know, scale is a tremendous weapon in pension provision. If you've got scale, you can really drive down costs, you can improve the quality of what you offer to members. And in the UK, we've got an awful lot of very small pension schemes. It's quite a distinctive and perhaps not particularly welcome feature of the UK pension system. So we would like to see the development of super trusts. These would be very large-scale, multi-employer DC schemes, and crucially, and it plays to the point you're raising, they'd have trust-based governance, so they'd have really high-quality governance. Someone really watching out for the members' interests and making sure that the choices over investment, fund management, and so on are really driven by the members' interests.
Interesting, because in that scenario, maybe there would be a reducing member base for the NAPF. If I take it, Nest has already become a member.
Nest is already a member, and no doubt they'll become one of our larger members, perhaps quite quickly. And yes, you're quite right. If we were able to get to a situation where we have large numbers of small schemes merging into a small number of large schemes, that would change our member base. But we think that would be a positive and something that we'd be able to adapt to. It would also be a change, of course, in terms of the regulator's perspective. At the moment, the pensions regulator and the FSA have to deal with a very large number of pension schemes. If we were able to achieve this change in the landscape to a small number of large schemes, then there might be a bit of a regulatory dividend. The regulators would be able to focus their efforts a little bit more and perhaps ease the overall regulatory burden.
And possibly require less funding.
Well, who knows? Of course, I mean, they're largely funded by levies paid by pension schemes. Our members would always be happy to see those levies at a lower level, I'm sure.
I'm sure they would, indeed. Let's follow on from our conversations about DC to look at auto-enrolment. Whether we like it or not, within a short space of time, a few years, very short in pension terms, we're going to have potentially millions of people saving via a pension scheme, a workplace scheme, for the first time, most of whom will be very reluctant savers, with all the attendant issues that will bring up, people opting out, employers not being terribly keen on following their duties. I know that instinctively you would want to say having more people saving is a good thing, but is this going to be a happy environment? And we've talked about Nest becoming a member of the NAPF, and it obviously is hoping to become a very large pension fund, but are we going to have, do you think, a happy climate over the next few years, or is it just going to be another source of contention and bitching about regulation and the administration and the complexity of pension schemes?
Well, this is a massive change in the pensions landscape, but I think we do have to focus on that big picture you mentioned, Brian. At the most basic level, this is about more people saving more for their retirement. That has got to be a good thing. Now, my colleagues have been working very hard with officials at DWP to make the process as simple as possible for schemes and for employers. And we think there have been some quite major improvements secured over the last few months in terms of the process of certification of schemes and so on. And this is very important if you're running a pension scheme. So we're hopeful that this will work out well. We're not naive enough to think it will all be plain sailing. Of course, there will be some difficulties along the way. But we've got to have, I think, a positive attitude and a little bit of hope in our hearts about all this. I mean, this is a big step forward in pension saving, something that had across-the-board support across all parties, across the CBI, the TUC. I think we've all got to get behind it and try and make it work.
Well, thank you very much indeed, James, for coming and talking to us today. It's been very interesting. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and if you found the desire to respond to what James has said, please post your comments on the site, and I'll ensure that they're fed back to him. And of course, you would have the right to reply.
Please, thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.